To the panel, the war in Ukraine, climate change, food security, and the impact in the Black Sea and the Balkan region. My name is Gina FÄNTÜNERU, and I will be your host and the moderator of this panel. We are at the University of Agronomic Sciences and Veterinary Medicine in Bucharest, with an exceptional panel of experts joining me today, and with an excellent audience. Thank you much for being here in this rainy Saturday morning. No need to dream to be somewhere else. It is raining all along the Black Sea coast. So we are ready to discuss, to analyze, to better understand the issue related to food security in this very complex context, and that for the next 80 minutes. Before starting, please note that simultaneous translation service is in place, and I invite you to take headsets, just in case you haven't taken them. We have been asked by the organizer to have this session in English, as we will be in contact with one of the panelists, Oksana ISHCHUK, that couldn't be here on reason of COVID. So let me introduce the speaker of this session. So we have the connection with Oksana. Oksana, do you hear us? Okay. Oksana ISHCHUK, Executive Director of Center for Global Studies Strategy 21 Ukraine. Mr. Zeno CAPRARIU, Audit and Assurance Partner Deloitte Romania. Thank you much for being here. Mr. Horia CIURTIN, Expert, New Strategy Center Romania. Thank you, Horia, for joining us. And Mr. Andrei URSULESCU, CEO, Scandia Food Romania. I will introduce the panel members in a little more detail at the moment of each one presentation. So we have 1 hour and 20 minutes for presentations of approximately 10 minutes each, Q&A session after each presentation, and a final discussion and conclusion at the end. I encourage both the audience and panel's members to actively participate in the Q&A session, to come with questions that could help us or that could enrich our knowledge about this subject. And what is the subject? Just few words about the subject today. So on this panel, we are looking at the impact of Ukraine conflict and extreme weather events on the regional food security. In fact, there are many other long-lasting drivers impacting food security, as the war came at a moment when the entire food system was already struggling to feed its growing population in a sustainable way under the pressure of climate change and, of course, of COVID-19 pandemic. While the most immediate and obvious effects are taking place in and around Ukraine, but disruptions from the war have reaching effects in the region. Also, food prices are decreasing, or at least the last official reports is what they tell us. Food affordability remains an issue, due especially to worrying forecasts regarding the next sowing season in Ukraine. Moreover, European crops summer have been critically affected by drought in the last time, with, of course, consequences on yields. What does it mean for poorest, for vulnerable, and what should be done to promote food security, to improve the resilience of our food systems to external shock? To answer these questions and more, let's start the debate by inviting the first speaker, Oksana ISHCHUK. Oksana, is she hearing us?
Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to speak at this honorable event for me, Director Andrei. So in my speech, I would like to highlight some points on the war in Ukraine, the Istanbul impact in the Black region, and the Balkans. For this, I would like to say that at the heart of the wider Black Sea region, the state which dominates the Black Sea and the whole region and civil influence adjacent to the Mediterranean and the Caspian Sea region and the Balkans. After the illegal forcible separation of the most of the north places of Ukraine and Georgia, American zone adjacent to the Abkhaz Autonomous Republic, the Black Sea is dominated by the Russian Federation. The Ministry of the Economy of Ukraine developed from the west for Ukraine in 2021 to 68 billion personal falls for policy volume of 41 billion. One day of Ukraine for its damages the domestic economy by about $70 million. Ukraine provided 46% of global sunflower oil exports, 9% of the wheat exports, 17% of the barley, and 20% of the maize on global markets. According to data from the U.S. Foreign Agricultural Service, Ukraine is one of the world's top agricultural producers and exporters, and play an important role in supplying grains to the global market. The Russian invasion and blockade of Ukrainian ports has significantly disrupted this food flow. Price spike in basic commodities and energy resources are already having a direct impact on the poorest households. With UNDP estimating the hotspots in the Balkans, the Caspian region, and sub-Saharan Africa. Between February 24, 2022 and August 1st, 2022, the estimated damage to Ukraine caused by the Russian
Sorry, Oksana.
American blockade may amount to more than $27 billion. Due to the blockade of seaports, which accounted for approximately 8% of Ukraine's agricultural exports, could have been exported exclusively through the Danube ports.
Oksana, okay. The sound is not so good. The connection is not good from Ukraine. Okay, in this condition, because we're not able to reach the message, maybe rugăm asistența tehnică dacă se poate să stabilim o conexiune mai târziu și începem cu un alt, sau continuăm cu ceilalți paneliști. Este ok așa? Credeți că puteți să verificați conexiunea? Deja un prim neprevăzut eveniment. Haideți să let's continue by inviting the next speaker to provide a contribution. I invite Zeno CAPRARIU. Can I have the message, the slides with the presentation? No, I have a slide for presenting you, but everything is blocked here on my. Zeno CAPRARIU is the audit partner, Deloitte Romania, leader of the Chief Financial Officer program in Romania. He joined Deloitte in 2003 and currently is an audit partner and client industry leader with Deloitte Romania. He has provided audit and assurance services to large multinational and local companies from various industries with primary focus on energy, resources, industrial, and consumer. Also, he has contributed to the development of new generation of business leaders in Romania through his involvement as mentor and facilitator in the Deloitte Next Generation Leadership Development Program. So, Zeno, we are very happy to have you here, and thank you much for taking the time to prepare and present us your contribution. You have the floor. Whenever you want.
Good morning. I hope you can hear me. Thank you for invitation. Thank you for having me here. During my short intervention, I'm going to provide with a brief overview based on available public data and our Deloitte research on the impact of climate change and the ongoing war in Ukraine on supply chains and overall economy. As you noted, the global supply chains, including food supply chain, have been significantly disrupted in the recent years. First, there were the trade wars. Then came the pandemic, followed by the war in Ukraine. And then there were many lockdowns in China. And now climate change is taking a toll. Record high temperatures are causing a severe drop in water levels in such disparate locations as France, Eastern Europe, China, Argentina, and United States. Water plays a role in generating power, as well as cooling nuclear power plants, and enabling production at some factories and coal mines. It also plays a role in inland shipping. Moreover, elevated temperatures have boosted demand for electricity at a time when supply is increasingly constrained and the prices are quite high. Given the climate change is getting worse, it appears likely that supply chain disruptions related to climate change will get worse as well. Moreover, climate change will not simply mean low water levels and shortages of water. It can also mean increased storm activity and flooding. This suggests a need for an increase in infrastructural investments meant to protect coastal areas from disruptions. For businesses, this trend suggests a need to develop plans to respond to disruption, diversify risk, and consider climate risk when making decisions regarding location, types of energy used, and access to water. In respect of food supply challenges, our view is that not only companies, but also consumers and governments have a role to play in order to tackle them. Companies should accelerate the innovation process to produce healthier products and more sustainably, focusing on personalized nutrition, ecosystem orchestration, and key feature of Industry 4.0, while helping consumers make responsible choices. In this respect, a better understanding of consumption by the companies is key, as the psychology of consumer is vital in making the right choices. There is also a need for businesses to move away from short-term thinking and start embracing and building longer-term relationships in the food chain, which will help them to address some of the operational risks and disruptions currently they face, and to meet the ambitious emissions targets and provide traceable, Paris-proof food. Consumers should place health and sustainability at the center of their shopping decisions, while governments should play a role of activator and accelerator in the food ecosystem, as consumers expect their intervention to actively promote healthy and more sustainable sourced food and discourage unhealthy and unsustainably sourced options. Disruptions caused by the ongoing war in Ukraine, like surging energy prices, disruption to production and trade in commodities, which these two countries are key exporters of, such as wheat and sunflower, but also inputs used in crop production, like natural gas, and fertilizers. Adding persistently high inflation and the looming risk of Russia cutting off gas supplies in the winter months have put the Eurozone economy, and also Romania's one, under an unprecedented level of stress. Inflation reached a record level in Eurozone, rising to 8.9% in July, and I think in August is above 9%. Energy prices rose by almost 40% year on year, while food prices by almost 10%. Actually, both energy and food are the main contributors to this high inflation rate. The Baltic states, just an example, saw an inflation rate in excess of 20%, the highest in the region, while Romania recorded an inflation rate of almost 15%. In this high inflation environment, as expected, the ECB changed course and increased interest rates for the first time in the last 11 years. The other central banks followed, including National Bank of Romania. The 50 basis points rate hike in July was larger than originally expected and brought the deposit rate out of negative territory to 0%. Further increases are expected in autumn. And this implies that the extended period of monetary policy at the zero lower bound is over, and that companies in the Eurozone and in Romania now need to prepare and adjust to rising interest rates. Despite the tumultuous economic environment, the baseline scenario for the Eurozone economy surprisingly looks quite positive at the first glance. In its latest forecast, the European Commission foresees a growth rate of 2.6% in 2022. There are, however, considerable risks for this baseline outlook for Eurozone and Romania as well. These include a potential recession in the United States and a slowdown in China, larger than expected monetary tightening in the face of high inflation, or even higher energy and commodity prices. But perhaps the greatest risk for the baseline scenario comes from a possible cutoff of Russian gas supplies in the winter period. While dependence on gas in general, and Russian gas in particular, varies widely across Europe, a total cutoff of Russian gas would severely affect several countries in Central and Eastern Europe, especially Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Germany, and Austria. On the other side of the spectrum, countries like Spain, Portugal, Romania, or France would be probably less affected. In a recent study, the International Monetary Fund calculated the potential effects of complete and immediate stop of Russian gas supplies on the economies in the Eurozone. Key results of the study show that over the next 12 months, the European Union will lose 1.8 and Romania 1.2 percentage points of GDP growth compared to the baseline scenario. Obviously, this calculation represents a worst-case scenario for Eurozone and Romania. Whether they become a reality depends on critical assumptions about demand and other factors, including the steps European countries take to tackle this challenge. In fact, the IMF recently called the current situation perhaps the biggest test for Europe since the Second World War. How well the region fares is ultimately a question of how resilient it remains in the face of mounting economic headwinds. This is the end of my intervention. I thank you for your attention, and I welcome your questions, if any. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeno, for this presentation. There are several ideas, several strong ideas that you presented here. I noted the one related to the cooperation, collaboration with all these stakeholders, because of course companies could accelerate the innovations, but only in collaborations. All stakeholders, government, consumers, producers, could go towards more productive, resource-efficient supply chain. And now let's go to the audience. We would like to take as many questions as we can. I think we have here some microphone runners that can help us with this. Just raise the hand to indicate your interest. And if you like to address a question to Zeno, just specify the question, and after that the context, if you consider useful to add 1-2 phrases to understand the question. Sound good? Don't be shy. And I will be also asking the members of the panel for questions. Maybe there are several. Yeah, we have a question here. We have a microphone here. Maria is not here to help us with the microphone.
Good morning. Thank you for the presentation. My name is Florin Tacu. I'm with Romanian MFA. I would like to ask you a little bit to expand the scope of the topic of this panel, and to provide us some more information about the influences that the tightening of the monetary policies will have upon the foreign investments in Romania. And I'm talking about foreign investments from other European member states to Romania, as well as from non-European Union member states. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. I hope I'll be able to provide a clear answer to you. You know, the tightening of the monetary policy is happening everywhere in the world. And if we look, United States started first and were very aggressive in this respect. The US dollar increased significantly. The other countries will do the same. ECB increased the interest rate, and Romania did the same. This means, depending on the level of monetary tightening in Romania, that Romania could be more competitive or not. On the other hand, we have to keep in mind the fact that Romania is very close to Ukraine, and our strategic geopolitical position might help us to see an increase in foreign investments in the next years. I wouldn't say that Romania or Eurozone is different in terms of the monetary policies it's going to embrace. They'll do the same. And I think Romania just followed and observed what the other countries in the European Union did. I think more important in terms of foreign investment is cooperation within the European Union, and to fix these short-term problems like high energy prices, short supply, and I think the rest will come.
Are you pleased with the answer? Other questions? Okay, maybe you want to see the overall presentations, and we'll keep some time at the end of this session. Next, I invite the next speaker to provide. How can I move it? It doesn't all? Maybe I should open it. Okay. So I invite Horia CIURTIN to present his contribution. Thank you, Horia, for being here. I understood that you have great news to offer us. You have the floor.
Is it working? Yes. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to speak in front of such a distinguished audience about a phenomenon that affects us all, a phenomenon which I am sure you are all well acquainted with, and that is the disruption of food supply chains generated by the invasion of Ukraine. As we all know, food can be instrumentalized as a weapon of war, and this is not a novel concept for any theory of conflict. The destruction of crops, of agricultural infrastructure, and the blockade of food delivery networks have been deployed by belligerents all across the globe, all across history. However, in past theory and practice, the weaponization of food by withholding supply against the enemy aimed at ensuring the upper hand in a bilateral relation. Famine directed at the adversary meant to deplete his resources or break his will to fight. The effects of using such a method are usually contained, and when they sometimes spill over, they rarely generate significant consequences beyond the region. It is easy to spot, easy to categorize, easy to condemn, and perhaps easy to sanction. Nonetheless, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia created a uniquely disturbing and taxonomically unbearable situation in terms of food security, one that exceeds the confines of legal provisions offered by the ICC statute. Moscow's all-out assault on Ukraine's entire production, deposit, and transport infrastructure does not aim at merely inducing deprivation upon the frontline enemy. Rather, it deploys the threat of famine as a tool of multilateral policy, a weapon pointed at the entire world. And how was this achieved? First of all, the naval blockade was instituted, effectively sealing all of Ukraine's Black Sea ports from trading with the wider world. More than 20 million tons of agricultural products headed for export remained grounded. Then followed a systematic campaign of incapacitating Ukraine's grain-producing sector, dismantling of infrastructure, theft of harvested stocks, and the removal of equipment and industrial hardware. Thus, in the first part of the war, it seemed that there is little prospect to resume seaborne activity in any of the 5 ports that are crucial in agricultural transport: Chernomorsk, Mykolaiv, Yuzhny, Odessa, and Olvia. Even more than being subject to a blockade, an active campaign of aerial bombing and missile strikes was directly targeted at some of the port loading infrastructure, physically destroying the capacity to utilize such assets in the future. In this sense, it appears that Russia's goal in diminishing Ukraine's output of grains to the world is not circumstantial, but falling under a long-term blueprint, one that is not limited to a blockade as we thought initially. Rather, Russia's approach is stratified on multiple levels, all of them converging in reaching a set of strategic objectives. And that is the lasting degradation of Ukraine's ability to produce foodstuffs, to store, to transport, and export them to the world markets in the future. At the same time, Ukraine's budgetary constraints would increase, losing a vital part of its revenues, while Moscow's global market share would grow at Ukraine's expense. And for these aims, the blockade was merely a prelude. The initial step in squeezing Ukraine out from the global markets reached its goal for the moment at that point. Even with the blockade apparently lifted at this stage, concerned importers have hedged their bets one way or another, looking for alternative suppliers or substitute products to prevent a hunger crisis within their territories. Well, and beside the blockade and the circumstantial looting of last year's harvest remaining stocks, other tactics are expected to disrupt Ukraine's capacity to recover from this commercial shock. More precisely, Russian troops have been reported to also destroy farming equipment and machinery, to destroy durable infrastructure such as silos and storage hubs, port loading facilities, and grain terminals. Such assets can prove difficult to replace in any situation, especially in times of war. Coupled with limited access to necessary fuel for operating farm machinery, and with growing scarcer fertilizers, the effects upon Ukrainian agriculture will definitely spread upon this year's harvest, one that is starting now, and the following ones. Given this phenomena affecting the sector, estimates of production by the Food Agriculture Organization estimate a significant contraction in output. More precisely, this year's harvest is expected to be at least 30% lower than the previous one, with the starkest decline in sunflower seed with almost 45% and corn 40%. On the other hand, production is only one side of the coin. Managing to ensure the proper growth of crops and their harvest proved to be a matter of resilience in Ukraine, no matter how dire the military and economic context proved to be. However, getting the product out of the country in a timely and efficient manner, but without raising the final cost so much that it becomes uncompetitive, raises significant challenges. Thus, in one way or another, Kiev's market share on the global market will shrink on the short and medium term. But there is a little bit of hope for Kiev's budget at this point, given that the high volumes once provided will be difficult to replace immediately. The high prices will allow Ukraine to maintain a similar level of income from it. And I think this is not just an agricultural tango for two, for Ukraine and Russia. but it is a start of a global race to the bottom, where all state and non-state actors and customers will compete and struggle in a Hobbesian manner to secure supplies, to stock, and to overstock. Therefore, I think that the threat of famine will not be urgent and will not be regional, not limited to Ukraine or Eastern Europe, but rather spreading to Asia and Africa. Next harvests are, with or without an active naval blockade, still under threat, and the perception of risk leads not only to higher prices, but also to a reconsideration of supply chains by traditional customers. And to end my presentation, I would say that the invasion of Ukraine and the deliberate curtailment of its agricultural capabilities created a game of Russian roulette, actually, with the whole world in attendance, targeting the most vulnerable members of the international community, with all the social and political unrest consequences on the table: mass migration, insurrection, civil war, and generalized strife. Because I think a spark in the Pontic granary may well be the prelude to a blaze across Eurasia. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you much, Horia. Received an observation that the sound is not very good. So thank you much for your intervention. Again, let's go to the audience for some questions related to Horia presentation. It's true, we'll have the debate at the end. It's specified in the program, but we also have time, and I have already announced at the beginning of the session that we have Q&A session after each intervention, just to benefit the fresh presentation that we heard. So, I have a question for you. So, or maybe the other panel members, they have a question, Zeno? No questions? What do you think, from your perspective, that is the best way to connect global and local measures, top-down and bottom-up measures, in order to connect and to rebuild and to transform food system in the current context, or given the current context?
And you mean especially in Ukraine or at the global level?
Not especially in Ukraine and in the region, because you have already said that all the food supply channels are reconsidered. So,
well, I think it will be a matter of working it multilaterally, because at this moment, I think there is a very big hunger to stock and to overstock grains to have them. And every customer, and I mean not only state, but big traders are operating and trying to secure supplies. And this can only be solved if we work in a multilateral format, and the UN would be a good choice for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Other questions? I think I have a list of good questions, but I will put them at the final of our session. And also, given the fact that Oksana isn't here, I think we can also try to benefit of these translation facilities, and you can put your questions in Romanian. And we can also try to provide the next presentation, the presentation of Andrei URSULESCU in Romanian, just to stimulate the discussion and to make them there to make interventions. So, Andrei URSULESCU, Chief Executive Officer of the Scandia Food. We have here this presentation. I have selected some words about him. a degree in economy, a master in management, degrees from Ivy League universities. He spent most of his career with Scandia Food and is actively involved in the development part of the business through merger and acquisition process. So, Andrei, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Can I kindly have the pointer, and I would like to
Yes,
sit
please.
in there. I like to move while I'm speaking.
So, feel free to provide the presentation
Morning,
either in
everybody.
Romanian
So,
or in
Romanian
English.
or English? Facem în română?
It's whatever the
plăcut
audience
pentru toată lumea?
wants. So you
Bine.
want it in Romanian or in English?
English, Romanian. Okay, so I wrote it in Romanian. I can speak both in English and Romanian as you choose. So
Okay.
let's do it in English. I will do my best to translate on a simultaneous basis. Distinguished audience, good morning. Before starting my presentation, I will show my gratitude to the organizers of Black Sea and Balkans Forum for having me in here and to have the occasion to put on the table a problematic such as food security in front of a relevant public such as the persons that are in the room. Thank you very much. Today I will speak not only as a representative of Scandia Food Group, but I will speak also as a representative of the food industry and of the private sector, of the business sector, let's say. And I hope that my exposure will somehow give you a flavor of what we are feeling in the real economy, actually in front of the storm that we are having to face in the past 2 years. So what I would like to focus a bit is on the necessity of the sector and what should be done for this sector to become resilient in front of this kind of tensions that we have seen in the past years. Why the sector has to be resilient? It's simple, because we don't want in a conflict situation to add additional stress on top of the population by having shortages of main goods. Just imagine if today, for God's sake, we hope that will not happen, some of the basic goods will disappear and we will be in a conflict state. We will be very, very, very unhappy on top of everything. We need to bring this topic of food security, even though before the COVID-19 pandemic and before the war it has been of, let's say, marginal importance, we have given it for granted as a permanent element of the economy and of the good working of the social systems, but today it gets a completely new dimension. I will go a bit with some context. So if 3 years we would have been in the same room and we would have made the assumptions that a global pandemic is going to come, or a war is going to be at Romania's national borders, probably would have been considered extremely pessimistic, or even it would have been something completely crazy, to say it very open and frankly. Seeing these two events have been big disruptors not only to the global economy, but also to the local economy, as we are part of the big international economic system, the big European family, and the big transatlantic partnership. So we are in the same, we are as vulnerable as all our other partners in front of these exogenous tensions and geopolitical challenges. So, going a bit in some data that I want to show you, let's see what are the ongoing courses. So, from 2020, the oil price hiked almost 4 times, 4 to 5 times, yeah, from 27.78 to 160 in May this year. We have seen that euro is losing its advance in front of the USD. Yesterday it was almost equal, 0.99 from 120 to 112. We have seen inflation that we have not seen in the past 40 years for the US. 9.1% in June 2022, and out of this 10.6%, 10.9% I think it was coming from food. EU is following the trend, as I previously said, so again, we are in somewhere around 9.1%, coming from 0.5 and 1.6 in the period before pandemic or even in the pandemic. What happens in Romania? We are following the trend. It's nothing to be, let's say, astonished by. Yeah? So what we are seeing is that we are going with the inflation of 15.1%. Again, a level in which any kind of national bank or the European Central Bank is completely against of, but unfortunately it's not in their control at this moment in time. Having said that, let's look a bit on what the Romanian meat sector looks like compared to the European one. So what I want to show you in here is that in Romania we have 36,000 per 42,000 pigs per 100 hectare, and I want to show you what Denmark is having, what Germany is having, what Belgium is having. We are at around 9 to 10% of the capacity of Denmark, and very, very, very far behind to Netherlands. And looking at the cattle production, we are actually somewhere 25% of any of the developed countries that are sending merchandise to our country. In here, some overview of the meat sector. We can see that we have a 3.88 kilogram per person consumption. It's food exports. We had 2.1 billion. What I want to show you as a key point from here, and coming back from this slide in here, is that the African swine flu fever, it's something that keeps the agri-business uncompetitive and it's keeping it underdeveloped. What words to be remembered in here is that more than 80% of the pork meat is coming from imports, and we don't have it in here. 911 million euros, it's the value of the imports of meats, and consider just that the market of processed meats at around 1 billion euros per year. As I said, we are not very competitive in here, and I want to go a bit on what happened on the 24th of February. On the 24th of February 2022, for us as producers and representatives of the food industry, we have seen somehow a repetition of the scenario that came in place when the pandemic started. Everybody remembers the long queues and lines in the retails where everybody was buying everything, being afraid that a big hunger will come. So panic came in. Everybody had a big pressure on the demand and on the stocks. We saw immediately a price increase on the raw material, packaging, transport, and utilities. On a macro level, currency started to fluctuate and interest rates immediately hiked. Having said that, what is actually happening? We see a clear obstruction of the supply chains and the capacities to have the merchandise inside our country. What I want to point out in here before going further with the presentation is that in case of crisis, what is actually happening with the sector if we are finding ourselves in the impossibility to have the raw materials in here. If we cannot provide the raw materials from Romania, and as I'm showing you just now, yeah, I want to show you this. This is, it's a letter, I put it anonymous, I didn't want to show the supplier, but this came in somewhere in March. It's a clear contract that we had with one Polish supplier for meat, yeah, very clear with warranties, with everything that needs to be done, that from one day to another has been cancelled. What are we doing in this situation? This is another supplier that had factories in Ukraine that was providing the tin cans, yeah, the one that you have seen us, that we are selling the pates and whatever we put in there. From one day to another, they said that they are not able to supply. And again, I'm extending this pessimistic scenario to the entire food industry. And I'm going to the basic goods, yeah? Let's consider the milling and bakery goods. Let's consider the sunflower oil. Let's consider meat, sugar. What is happening if we don't have this? And we are in a state of conflict in which we are not able to import it anymore. As I was saying, part of the context of the new context, look, I didn't put specific numbers, I just want to show you the trends. This is electricity and this is gas. Yeah. This is what we are paying in our company. This is 2019. Look a bit where we are in 2022 with the start of war. This is the raw material price. It follows, it has a slight delay in terms of the effects of calamities. The logistic cost as part of the oil price increase, and what can be done in here. This is my humble opinion, what I want to finally address some potential solutions for the issues that we are having. So, if we are looking a bit at the food sector, it's something that, as I said at the beginning, it has to be a very important part of the national security strategy. It's not something to be disconsidered, and it's something to be put focus on in terms of building the required autonomy for cases of emergency. And how can we do that? Well, there are many ways in which we can do that. First of all, it needs to be a constant, let's say, cooperation between the private sector and the state entities. If we consider just some basic scenarios, these are just, let's say, superficial and simple ones, but let's consider some basic scenarios. If we look from a tax perspective, the sector would need some kind of a fiscal structure that would allow the sector to develop. Why I'm saying this? Make a simple arithmetic. How many times should the pig sector increase to become as competitive as the one in Denmark, or in Germany, or in Spain, or in Poland? How can we do that? It's impossible. From where we are today, without the support of the state, of the financial sector, of everything, it's impossible to reach this way. So if we look at it from a tax perspective, the entire industry should benefit from a special fiscal regime. Yeah. Second, what we have seen in our experience, and again, now I'm speaking for Scandia, but it's a general, let's say, approach that we have seen in many other companies that we are trying to partner with. The access to European funds, to governmental help, to any kind of financial grants, it's very complicated. It's extremely bureaucratic, and it takes a lot of time to put in place such a process and to have it completed. One thing in here would be to make it much easier to have this money accessed by the local actors, by the players in the industry. Why? Because money should flow rapidly through the economy. As I said, again, I'm repeating again that we should put in the national strategy, defense strategy of Romania, the food sector. It's already mentioned in there, but it's not enough mentioned. We should clearly amend the problematic of the food security and what should be done, and the sector should be regulated accordingly. The fourth thing that I want to actually to expose, and it's somehow an invitation to all of you to make a debate on this, it's actually the paradigm that I'm going to show you. What is actually the cost of autonomy? If we want today, if we are thinking it from just a business-wise, yeah, let's think the food sector. Do we all want, as a government, to have the food sector fully profitable? If yes, this means that we have to import a certain quantity of goods because Romania is not competitive at producing them. But what happens if, let's say, for tomorrow, war will come, supply chains are obstructed, and we are not able to have sugar in our country? Today, Romania has only 2 or 3 production facilities of sugar because the sector is not profitable enough and it's not competitive enough. How we should look at this problematic? Should we consider that the sugar sector or one sector of the food industry can be subsidized as the cost of defense, as a cost of building resilience in the food sector? Or should we strictly look at it from a business perspective in which we say if this sector is not profitable, we will reorientate ourselves to imports from abroad? We should be very careful at this. My personal opinion, my humble opinion is that having seen the reality of the past 2 years, it's something that can be seriously considered. Last but not least, as I was saying, in order to develop the sector and build resilience, we need investments. And in here, the financial sector needs to play an important role in sustaining the development of the food industry. Banks, together with state, with the local actors, with the local players, can build tailor-made financing structures in order to be able to sustain the development of production capacities, to agricultural capacities, to reach levels of agricultural output that are being able to be compared to the ones outside. So all of this, summing up what I have said, I just want to tell you that we are building our scenarios of working in very atypical and in full uncertainty, not only as the company, but also as a private sector. And we are kindly inviting everybody to show prudence, to show responsibility, and to make what is the best for the Romanian food sector. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't bother you. And this was in Romanian, so pardon my English. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. URSULESCU, for taking the time to prepare such a very interesting presentation. Now the debate is open. We want to take questions from you. Yes, we have a question. We have a microphone runners here. So just raise the hand, Maria will find you. Or we have 2 microphone runners, in fact.
Got it. Mehmet Kınacı from ACT Strategic Foresight team. Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. The subject, actually, one of the area that you would like to cover is the climate change. And we heard about like a mentioning of Global South and the impact of climate change and on food security. My question is actually twofold. First one is the impact of climate change in Africa, especially the Middle East and North Africa, is going to be severe. And there will be consequences, that there will be migration, there will be people's movement, and then there will be impact on the food that you might produce. And you talk about public-private coordination, how to deal with the food security issue. So that there will be migration. Now in the south, like Turkey, Turkey accommodates over like 8 to 10 million refugees now. If you consider the such size, maybe 10–15% of the population, that the demand will increase significantly. The second thing is the social impact of food security. There will be people haves and have-nots, and increasing inequality, polarization in the society that you have not mentioned. How do you think this will change the Romanian society or Europe? Thank you.
You have addressed these questions to a specific panelist. Okay, so.
Okay, I can start to provide a few ideas to your questions. I think the first question, and climate and also social. I think there are many problems in respect of the food security. One is the shrinking of the agricultural land, as you mentioned, because of the climate change. Second is increased population, significant increase in population globally. But also we have some good examples of countries which have these problems, like Israel. If you think, Israel has, I think, 50% of the land is desert. And in this context, I think they managed through innovation and use technology to have a extraordinary competitiveness in respect of food. They are the biggest exporters of milk. They are one of the most innovative country in respect of the agricultural spectrum. What we can learn from them is that, and I think I touched a bit in my previous presentation, is that the companies in the food sector should embrace more and more technology and innovation. And here government has a role to play, and here I will liaise with the previous presentation, that somehow should be a strategic plan how to encourage innovation and use of technology in this sector by the government. Going back to Israel model, which is very, very famous, government is subsidizing any kind of startup coming with ideas just to stimulate innovation. And then once the innovation became a business case, then that company is paying back the financing to the government. And I think in this way they stimulated not only in agriculture but also in defense, also in health care, a lot of innovation, and they're extremely competitive. And I'll stop here and I'll leave some space for the other speakers to comment.
Well, I think that the main problem is that the impact of climate change and the social impact on the population is that it will be largely asymmetric in the world. It would not be spread equally. Access to food will be easier for those countries who can manage to pay for it, because less volumes on the market will mean higher prices. But this does not mean that they will be shielded from the effects, because social unrest and problems in the global south, to call it that way, will bring problems to Europe's doors as it always has been. And this is something that we really need to address globally, and mechanisms for capping prices. I know it's not popular with the industry, but at some point it will be necessary to do that. And only in a multilateral context, bringing all the actors to the table can be done.
Thank you. Mr. URSULESCU, you would like to add some words to this?
Very, very short. So in terms of climate change, as my colleague panelist said, I think that it will be an added cost of the food in the future. And in terms of the social impact, I think that we are pretty adaptable. We are not going to necessarily starve, but I think that potential food crises are just add-ons to, let's say, structural problems. And I wouldn't necessarily see as a root cause, but I would see it just as a form of complementarity to conflicts or other tense situations.
I would like to add two more things, if I may, regarding climate change and also social aspect of the food security. I think both consumers and companies should embrace the net positive movement. So we should consume less and to give more to the nature compared to what we consume, and to reduce food waste. Because I think in the developed countries, the food waste is huge.
Good observation. Yes, you would like to answer this question, or you have, okay. Yes, next questions from Mr. Prorector Florin Stănică.
Hello everyone, Florin Stănică, Vice Rector for International Relations at the University of Agronomic Sciences and Veterinary Medicine in Bucharest. So Mr. URSULESCU already answered to some of my previous questions, but I would like to comment anyway and to discuss with you some aspects that I think are extremely serious for Romania, as already Mr. URSULESCU mentioned. Romania is an important cereal producer and agro-food producer in this area affected by Ukrainian war. In the same time, we need to think that Romania exports most of its products. I mean, the cereal, if you go every day to Constanța Harbor, you will see plenty of trucks exporting seeds, grains, all types of raw agricultural material from Romania. So we are producing a lot of corn. So I think 3.5 million hectares. In the same time, as Mr. URSULESCU said, our animal husbandry sector is far away from its potential. So what we are doing, we are producing corn in order, instead of transforming it in meat and then in other processed products from meat, we are exporting corn. We are discussing about climate change and drought. After these rains, the farmers will forget the drought because they will be happy to be able to sow the seeds for the wheat and for the other autumn crops. And probably some other decisional key person will forget about the drought till the next summer when the drought will come again. So in my opinion, my question or my questions would be, is Romania and the political factors aware of our situation here? We are discussing every day about potential, but what we are doing to use this potential, to make it real, to transform it from potential to reality. So, in my opinion, we should have 3 or 4 sectors where we should really invest. So we cannot have competitive agriculture without irrigation. We cannot have a real competitiveness without supporting the research in agriculture field, in applied agriculture and in agriculture education. And then we cannot be competitive if we will continue to export raw materials instead of processing them here and to profit of this all potential that we have. So it is a rhetoric question. How can we make a statement? Maybe this forum can make a statement to our decision leaders to underline someone, to do some proposal for the future agriculture policy in Romania. And how can we stress on these topics that are extremely, extremely hot, in my opinion. Just one other idea. Another idea, it's related the imports of, I'm a professor of fruit technology, of pomology. So Romania is continuing to import fruit and vegetables, some 2 billion euros every year. We continue to import seeds and planting material, more than 1.5 billion euros every year. Imagine that 10% of this money every year would be invested in research, in the production of local seeds and planting material. Thank you.
Very strong words, yeah. Do you want to complete or one more question?
I think it's a good moment to follow up on the topic raised by you. So, first of all, Mr. Ursulescu, thank you for the presentation, and also thank you for the quality of your products. You mentioned some of the possible measures to be taken by the government in order to increase the competitiveness of the food sector in Romania. And the gentleman who put the question just before me highlighted the difference between the production of raw material versus the manufactured things based on agricultural products. One thing that I'd like to ask your opinion, and not only of Mr. Ursulescu, would be how can we do it from the perspective of the human resource to be dedicated to such sector? Because it's a hot topic. We all know that the topic of the human resources, human talents, it's very, very intensely discussed in nowadays. You mentioned some of the possible measures. With whom should we do this to increase the production, to increase the competitiveness of the agricultural sector? I would like as well to have the opinion of the chair of the panel, since she is the vice rector of one of the most prestigious educational institutions in Romania dedicated to this sector, as well as from Mr. CAPRARIU from his vantage point of from Deloitte to have an overview perspective of the Romanian economy and this agricultural sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. It's a very, very good, let's say, problem raised to the nest, let's say, to the net. We are facing major difficulties in finding specialists in food industries, because food industry somehow has not been attractive enough in the past years for the big universities. We have one in Sibiu and we have one in Galați, Dunărea de Jos, which were providing specialists. Our specialists, as most of the specialists from all the educational fields that Romania is providing, are more tempted to go abroad. The ones that are remaining in Romania have to be additionally paid or aligned to the European, to the Western kind of payrolls and salaries, which means that, again, we are adding on top of the cost of the product. Going on the cost of the product, because this is where I was willing to arrive, it needs to be a change of perspective. We don't need to consume any more cheap stuff. Why are we consuming the cheapest stuff ever? We go to any kind of retailer and we are buying products at less than €1. I'm amazed by how someone can produce something, has profit and pay taxes on a good that it's less than €1. How can everybody on the production and logistic chain can have a profit? And we are still having a mass majority of the population eating this kind of stuff. If we are not going to start investing in educating the consumer to eat healthy goods and to be more cautious about what he is eating, we'll always produce cheap stuff. And cheap stuff doesn't require any kind of intellectual, let's say, added value. Yeah? Good stuff requires brains, requires engineering, requires R&D, requires specialists, requires people that are actually very good in what they are doing. If we want only to eat cheap stuff, we don't need specialists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ursulescu. Zeno, can you give your opinion about these questions related to human resources on agri-food system?
Yeah, I think the shrinkage of human resources is something pandemic in Romania. I think every single sector faces the lack of adequate talent. And this is because in the last 30 years, I would say that the educational system in Romania suffered, deteriorated. I think every single minister changed the law or amended the law. There was not, from my perspective, a very clear direction in respect of what we like to achieve through education, what are our strategic sectors, where we like to put more innovation, and then how we can attract the young talented students who are leaving the country every single year, going to universities abroad, to come back. So this is and also there is a shrinkage of talent, not only because of the government, but also because of the decreased natality, and this is a fact. And not only in Romania, and it is a fact that once the economy develops, natality decreases, and we see this in the Western Europe. So, to answer to your question, I think one is to have a consistent policy at the government level. I think should be a priority, like a national security priority, to keep the talent in the country. And then to have a closer look to the educational system. What should be changed in order to have students with an adequate background to innovate and to work in Romania. Second, I think the fiscal system should be also adapted. If you want to attract people, if you remember, when you wanted to develop technology system, there were a lot of fiscal facilities given by the government. I think is an option to look more carefully to the fiscal system to keep the employees in Romania. And the third point for the companies is to adopt technologies, because the new technologies also compensate for the lack of human resources. And I mentioned in my presentation, in Romania, unfortunately, not too many companies are looking beyond the traditional way of doing business. And we have technology competencies in Romania. We are partnering with other companies in the US and across the globe where there is technology. I think it's just to have the courage and to really embrace this new technology and to compensate for the lack of human resources in Romania. And also here government has a role to play, because these investments should be encouraged through fiscal incentives, through financing and so on and so forth. So the problem is quite complex. And even the multinationals, I could say, are facing the shrinkage of talent and difficulty to find the right people these days. There are companies and also our clients which are investing a lot on their own school in order to train people, and all their own training programs to train people to be adequate for their business purposes. Thank you.
Yes, it was very good questions. We have already yesterday a very big discussion about education and what should be changed, what should be kept, how to be better. The main ideas were already presented by my colleagues here in the panel, related to the increasing awareness to consumers to ask for good quality food and to have good prices for our farmers, and to make them wishing to develop this business. We also have, we only look to the education. We know to do that. We have our students, we have our alumni already covering 90% of our territory, developing agri-food farms, first of all, and also agri-food companies. But sometimes we need the economy to be at the level of education. We need to have them being attracted by the economic environment in Romania. Otherwise, they will have other opportunities, and they will have this desire to live and to develop and to put in work their talents in some other countries. Is of course dimensions that that has already been presented, how to keep and how to attract this talent. And of course, an idea that I liked and was presented here during the discussion is this: investing in education, investing in innovation, investing in research. Is to some extent investing in food security, in our security, is investing in peace. And I would like to keep this idea as a main answer, a main part of my answer to you. we are getting close to the end of our time together. I would like just to wrap up this session by asking a short questions to our panelists. What is one thing that you hope the audience will take away from our discussion? One thing. Mr. Ursulescu? Just very short.
I would like our honorable audience to acknowledge the importance of being united in terms of private sector and local authorities, and to tailor up together strategies meant to create a very strong and resilient food sector. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you.
Well, I would like everyone to remember that just by lifting the blockade in Ukraine, the story is not over for food security, and Ukraine needs to be helped continuously with its future crops and with getting the product out of the country. Just lifting the blockade is not enough if its entire infrastructure for agriculture is destroyed systematically.
Okay. And Mr. CAPRARIU?
From my side, I think to tackle the climate change challenges on the food supply, businesses, consumers, and governments should cooperate. And in particular, the education component of consumer is important, while the investment in innovation research of the company is essential. Thank you.
Very good ideas to reflect upon after this session, because we're at the end of this session. I would like to thank you all for coming here today. It has been a pleasure to share this discussion with such a wonderful audience. And we are also grateful for our expert most interesting presentation and for all ideas presented today. A big thank is due to organizers for this event and to our technical assistants that tried its best to put us in contact with Oksana. Unfortunately, we didn't manage today. I really hope that it was a fruitful debate, and in that spirit, I invite you to join us further on for the next program of this forum. Thank you very much.